Hello and welcome back to, or for the very first time to the channel, I am William Gwyn, and today I'm going to be talking about every single book that I read in 2022. But of course there has to be some restrictions, because if I was just allowed to talk about them freely, with no rules, then I would literally be talking for hours. So I'm only allowed to say one line or two lines each, maybe the premise and then a line. I'm bending the rules already. But I read 106 books in 2022, the first time I've ever hit that big 100 in an annual year. I got the idea to do this video because about a year ago, probably even longer than that, I watched a video by Jack Edwards and he did a similar thing. So I thought, you know what, I'll try this out, see if I've got the discipline to not talk too long and yeah, get through all these books. And as I said, it's the most books I've ever read in a year before. Some incredible books, many that infiltrate the ranks of my favourites of all time. So let's just get straight on into it. My first read of 2022 was The Gunslinger, which is book one of The Dark Tower by Stephen King, and I imagine I don't need to introduce this series to you, but I listened to this on Audible, and on reflection I don't think this really suited Audible, or it may do, but it just didn't click with me. Of course, this is subjective, and so I didn't have that great a time with it, but I will definitely be rereading it at some point. I'm not giving up on Dark Tower. And then after that, I read the first one that I've got present is Lionheart by Ben Kane. He is an author who is renowned for his historical fiction works, particularly that centering on ancient Rome. But this is about Richard the Lionheart, and I thought this is a really brilliant, formative, coming-of-age story centering on a character called Ferdia, who is taken as a hostage as a child to secure his family's loyalty, and then somehow his life becomes intertwined with that of Richard the Lionheart. So yeah, that is Lionheart, book one of Richard the Lionheart series, and I loved it. And then next up I got a bit into comics at the end of 2021. I read Old Man Logan, and that was the first comic I'd ever read. And then I picked up Batman Zero Year, and this was really enjoyable. I didn't really love it, and I don't remember too many details, but it was a great introduction to comics. This Batman, a bit of an origin story, looking at his past, his first few quest time, you could say, as the Batman. And so yeah, really enjoyable, some really great illustrations here. I really liked the style. And then next up after that, I have Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell, book one of the Greatcoat series. And as I said, this is Traitor's Blade. It's very famous for the bromance at the core of this, Kess, Brusty and Falcio. But for a third of this book one, they're not together. I've really enjoyed this, really enjoyed the plot. The plot is simple at times, but it doesn't matter because the characters are so great and you're loving what is going on. It doesn't need to be incredibly epic or complex to be a great, entertaining read, and the Traitor's Blade proves that. And then I have The Serpent Sword, book one of the Bernicia Chronicles by Matthew Harvey. At the tail end of 2021, I read the first book that I picked up by him, which was The Wolf of Wessex, and then I picked up this, book one of his series. I believe there's 7 installments out now, and it's really great. Again, another coming-of-age story. This is the beginning of his journey to become a warrior, renowned leader, and so on and so forth. And it's kind of got Bernard Cornwell vibes with Uhtred and all of that, but done in a different, fresh way, and I highly recommend Matthew Harvey, this series, but also his works as a whole. And then next up I have Dune, of course, that beast of a book, both literally and metaphorically. Dune, the film, he came out in 2021. I enjoyed the film, didn't love it. The book, I didn't love it, but I really highly respect it, and I did really enjoy it as well. It's one of those that, even though I personally, it's not in my favourites, I would still recommend it to everyone. I thought some of the characters were a bit too simplified, and it just felt a little bit jarring at times when you had these really complex characters with those whose motivations were very simple. And yeah, so that was a bit jarring, but overall really enjoyed it. Some awesome action sequences, and I love how vivid this world is. And so yeah, overall Dune, I'm very glad I read it. Big success. I still really enjoyed it despite the problems I had with it. And then next up after that, I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, the only book that she ever wrote, because she was more well known for her poetry. And The Bell Jar, this was really great. It kind of looks at the taboos of society and just discusses them with no qualms. And I love that Sylvia Plath. She doesn't do it for the sake of it. She does it because she wants to. And this is a great book looking at the pressures of society, kind of a fall into depression and mental health issues, and kind of that slow fall into that, as I said. And I thought it was really well written, brilliant central protagonist, and I thought this Sylvia Plath, she could have gone over the top and kind of been showing off with her grasp on the English language, but she didn't. She just did exactly what was needed, and in my opinion it was actually brilliant. And yeah, she's an incredible writer. I love her poetry, and The Belljar is to be added to the list of her works that I really enjoyed. And then next up I have the first Bernard Cornwell book on this list, and that is The Death of Kings. That is, let me just check, the 5th installment of the Saxon stories. Of course, it is now known as The Last Kingdom because of this adaptation onto Netflix. This forms the first half of season 3, and sadly this was a bit of a low for the series. I thought this is where it's beginning to hit its template of new bad guy. Uhtred goes with the same band, and basically just the same thing happens again and again. And of course that's not the whole series, as I'll get to a lot of Bernard Cornwell to come, but really this was more of a disappointment than a great one, but it's still one that I'd say push through because there's so much more to enjoy in the Saxon stories. And then next up I have Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I absolutely love Normal People. I really loved Beautiful World, Where Are You as well, and Conversations with Friends was also great. Probably my least favourite of the 3 because I didn't love the characters as much. They're still as vivid and well realised and just incredible characterisation, but because I didn't love them and didn't really identify with them as much, it was just that extra level that I have Beautiful World and Normal People. But this is such a popular book, and I'm so glad that I also really enjoyed it. Sally Rooney does dialogue, modern contemporary dialogue, like basically no one else I've ever read, and it's absolutely incredible how she shows the flaws and virtues of people and manages to allow you to identify with them and really just relate to them, and looking at the human experience in the modern day, and she does that brilliantly with Conversations with Friends. And then next up I have Night Shadow Book 2 of The Greatcoats by Sebastian de Castell, and this is where the bromance really comes into play even more. Falco, Kess and Brasti really come together, and I absolutely love this. My favourite of the series, one of my favourite reads of 2022. I love the twists and turns and surprises and the betrayals, backstabs, and all of that, all the revelations as well that came especially in the final third of Night Shadow, and I thought Sebastian de Castell did a great job of allowing these central bromance, them to evolve as different characters and to show that whilst they do seem to annoy each other at times, they love each other so much, and that is why they carry on. It's not for their other goals, that's why they want to carry on. Sorry, I think I just hit my mic, but a big part of their driving force is their love for each other, and that is just brilliant. I know I skipped past it as a bit before, but this is Home of the Brave, another comic that I was really getting into, and this is looking at Captain America, and yeah, I enjoyed it. There's a bit of time travel in there and loads of stuff like that. And yeah, it was enjoyable, a fun read. It's one of those I don't remember too much about, but I remember really enjoying it at the time. So it won't be going down my favourites, but it's still one I'd highly recommend because I was immersed. Again, really enjoyed the illustrations and the art. And so yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I definitely need to get to more comics in 2023. And then next I've got some more historical fiction, but some crime thriller historical fiction. And this is book 1 of the Matthew Shardlake series, Disillusion by C.J. Sansom. And so we have a main figure. He goes and investigates a murder at a monastery. And this is during the time, of course, of Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII. That's when this time period is. I don't know why I said of course, but I didn't even say when it is set. But so it's kind of during that time of the early days of the dissolution of the monasteries, which was of course a huge event in English history where the formation of the English church formed and England left the Catholic Church. And anyway, so of course huge political events going on, but then we've got this more intimate murder story within the mix. And I love the revelations and how those kind of political background really comes to play in Dissolution. It allowed for so many different layers to come into play, and yeah, really great. And I need to carry on with the series. I'll be reading Darkfire book 2 in this series in 2023. And then next up, what do I have? The next one in the Bernard Cornwell series, Saxon Stories, of course, The Burning Land. This is book 6, and this was another one that I thought the first 4 were brilliant, and then 5, which I talked about earlier, and then number 6, The Burning Land, was the biggest dip for me in my opinion. And yeah, so this is another one I thought hitting the template, and it's enjoyable because Uhtred's there and he's such a brilliant character, and whilst there may be faults with other aspects of the plot and the characters, Uhtred always has growth in every single book, and this is kind of the phase where he's beyond his youth now, and so I found that really enjoyable despite it being a bit, not mundane, that's a bit too far, but a bit more, it wasn't as fun or exciting because you knew what was going to happen basically. It's hit that template, but yeah, still one that I'd recommend push through, and there are great aspects to this nonetheless. And then next up I have Foxglove Summer, and actually no I don't. No, I really don't. I have Tender is the Flesh, and so this is kind of a dystopian read, and it was very disturbing, but really There are bits that I thought were a bit too over the top. It's kind of this world where a lot of crops have died and people are struggling to find food, and so a lot of people turn to cannibalism. And so, yes, very dark themes come into play. And I thought this could have been done so well, an incredible premise. But for me, it just fell a bit short, other than the ending, which I thought was a great little twist, and I really enjoyed that. So, yeah, Tenders of the Flesh just missed the mark a bit for me. And then I have The Women of Troy, Book 2 of The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. I have raved about The Silence of the Girls on this channel and on the Brothers Gwyn with my brother. I actually did a review of Silence of the Girls, and The Women of Troy is the sequel. So we're looking at the aftermath of Troy. Troy has fallen. What happens to the people after this? Specifically, the women who are so often just pushed to the periphery of Greek myths, even though they should be playing such a major integral role, and they really do. But they're often just overlooked, and Pat Barker is one amongst a varied group of authors who are trying to rectify those mistakes alongside those such as Jennifer Saint and Natalie Haynes. And so, yeah, Pat Barker is one of them, and I would arguably say the best. The Women of Troy is absolutely incredible. The Silence of the Girls is one of my favourite books of all time. The Women of Troy is up there as well, and I love how Pat Barker, just her writing style really enforces and mirrors what she's trying to convey in the writing, and all the characters and kind of the themes that come into play as well. It really just, they work together to show that she's a brilliant writer, and she can weave her storytelling and change her style to really just, as I said, enforce all these other aspects that the world, the themes, the characters, and the dialogue, and so much more put together. And so, yeah, it really weaves in and out of each other, and they work so well, and it's really great seeing characters that have been done so many times, but they're done fresh in The Women of Troy. Sorry, I was talking a bit long about that. I'm meant to be shorter with these. And next up, I have Foxglove Summer by Ben Aronovich. This is books 5 or 6. Sorry, I've got bad eyes, I can't see the screen as well. 5 or 6 of the Rivers of London series, which has become a phenomenon. And I thought the instalment before this got a bit into the template, a bit like I was talking about Bernard Cornwell. That feels a bit like what's happening with Rivers of London, but this rectified it. In this one, our main character, our protagonist, is taken out of London, his home that he absolutely loves, and he's taken to a village, and it's so funny that he wants to have, say, like fish and chips, and then he goes to get it, and it's at like 6 at night, but it's shut because it's a village. And it's so funny how he's having all these other stresses, and usually you can rely on London, the place he loves. But here, he's just really stressing out, and it's tipping him over the edge because he can't cope with village life. And I really loved this little mystery in here, and it's more incorporating more of that magic system and the history of the world as Ben Aronovich imagines it. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I've returned to form in the Rivers of London series. And then next up, I have Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill, book 1 of The Bound and the Broken. This is a series you'll hear more about in this video, and I really enjoyed Of Blood and Fire. It kind of takes those traditional fantasy elements and then mixes it with more modern takes, and I really enjoyed that mix of nostalgia but surprises, and also subverting your expectations as well. And putting them both together, it was just really great read. I love that this is also a coming of age story, a Bildungsroman, and I thought that Ryan Cahill did that really well. Because these tropes, they're loved for a reason, but sometimes they can be a bit stagnant because they've been done so many times. But Ryan Cahill avoided that, and he made sure it was really interesting and engaging, and I highly recommend this series. And if you doubt the quality of indie publishing or indie authors, please do try this out, and I believe that you'll realise the quality that is there. And then next up, I have The Wisdom of Christ by Joe Abercrombie, the third of his more recent series in the First Law world. And I really enjoyed this because Joe Abercrombie is one of my favourite authors of all time, and I absolutely adore every single other book he's written. It probably felt a little bit short to me. The ending didn't quite click with me as much, but it's still a 4-5 star read, so I still really enjoyed it. It's a bit harsh because an author's so great, you kind of view that others a bit more harshly because it didn't quite reach those lofty heights. But still, The Wisdom of Crowds is great. I'd recommend the series, and I've really enjoyed Wisdom of our characters. Ended up, I probably prefer the characters in the first trilogy, but that's because they're the greatest set of characters possibly ever. And The Wisdom of Crowds, it was really enjoyable, just not what I was expecting. Please do let me know what your thoughts were in the comments below with that book and with any of the others. And then next up, I have Troy by Stephen Fry, the third of his Greek retellings. I think he's going to have a fourth and final one, which is going to be about the Odyssey. But he began with Mythos, which is about kind of the origins of the world in Greek myth and kind of those original gods and titans and deities. And then there was the second one about heroes, and these were more about the demigods and the children of the gods and all the heroes in Greek myths. And I loved that. And then Troy goes to the Troy the Trojan War, obviously, and I thought that because I think it's because I know more about the Trojan retellings, I imagine most people do, it didn't feel as fresh, and so I was a bit disengaged in that way because it wasn't a fresh take on the characters. But Stephen Fry is so witty and humorous, and he's got a brilliant writing style, that it is still an engaging read, and it just didn't quite reach the heights of the first two for me. And so yeah, at times I'd say maybe take this slowly and read it just every now and then. You don't need to read it in one sweep, because it's a story we know so well, and Stephen Fry's not telling it in that narrative. It's a lot of little side stories that come into play. So I'd probably recommend reading this just bit by bit whilst you're working, maybe reading a big book, something like Manners on a Wheel of Time. Then every now and then have a little break, read one of these short stories, and I think it'd be a lot funner than the way I went through it, because going through it with a few hundred pages, all the gods are fleet-footed Achilles, strong this, amazing that, and it gets a little bit repetitive, but it's still really great to learn more about the Greek myths, and Stephen Fry does a brilliant job of presenting them. And then next up I have Imaro, which is kind of a traditional fantasy sword and sorcery kind of thing that has been likened to Conan, and is inspired by African traditions and legends, and I did enjoy this. I see the relations to Conan in some ways, in that we've got a main kind of protagonist, he's a warrior, and he comes into play with the world, but beyond that, not so much. And I think that this is a series of short stories, and overall I felt it lacked that extra layer to immerse me in the story. Whilst they're chronological, they're a bit detached, but when you've got that style, I think you need something connecting them all, a through line as well. And I just didn't feel there was that much growth with our characters, which I will talk about when I talk about the second collection soon in this video. But yeah, Imaro, it was good, but not one that I really loved. But then next up I have a book that I did love, and that is the Pagan Lord, book 7 of the Bernard Cornwell books. And as I said, 5 and 6 were a bit of a letdown for me, but 7 returned to form. And the ending of this book is probably the best 30-40 pages of any of the Saxon Stories books. 5 stars for me, and that ending is brilliant, absolutely fantastic, humorous, but also really enforcing who Uhtred is as a character, and you really see that these people who care about him as well. It's quite emotional, and it really all comes together. And this feels like a unique book. It's not like the others that follow a bit of a template. And so yeah, the Pagan Lord returns to that kind of more unique style that Bernard Cornwell interweaves in the template, but it makes it feel very fresh. Sorry, a little lump in my throat, so I had to stop there. But next up, I have 1984 by George Orwell, and I really enjoyed this. This is one that I respect so much. I can't believe I haven't read it until 2022. And it is a bit eerie, all the different aspects. I love the idea of to restrict what people can think and being rebellious. They're slowly taking words out of the dictionary each year so that people can't express themselves properly. And that is such a unique and powerful idea, that without being able to express yourself, you can't really know what you're thinking. And that is terrifying, but I also love books that really show the power of language as well. And so 1984, it's a must read for everyone, isn't it? It's a classic for a reason, and I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading it. And then next up, what do I have? I've Let the Right One In by John Linkfist. I've done a review for this on the channel as well. This is a horror story that has vampires in it, but who are the real monsters? Is it the humans who are terrible for an array of reasons for their own gain, or is it the vampires you have to kill just to survive? Which is better? They both do terrible things. There's no good people in these books, but really great reader. And this is not just a simple horror story. To leave it as that would be a gross injustice. I really highly recommend checking this out. It is so more than the sum of its parts seem to suggest. And as I said, one of my favourites of 2022. Loved it. Horror story with a twist. And then next up, what do I have? I have, another great one, and this is Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. I really went on a great run in 2022 of 3 or 4 of my favourite books of the year in a row. And Gates of Fire is a standalone. It's about telling the story of Thermopylae, which is 300, these 300 Spartans against the army of the Persians. And it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's kind of the myth as we know it today. And I call it a myth because even though it is a battle that happened, there's so much mythology that's built around it. That is what it is nowadays, but this is really stripping it back to the historical details. What happens? We've got the epic story of that stand, but within it we've got a more intimate story. It's a chronicler's tale with a framing narrative, where we've got someone on the Spartan side recounting their story. And I thought this was written brilliantly. It shows the terrible things the Greek states did as well. They're not perfect by any means, but within that you see the sins and the flaws of all these characters, but you also got that engagement with the idea of sacrificing yourself for the greater good. And that's not romanticizing it, that's just the idea, the stoic mindset that it shows the Spartans have. And I thought it was really great looking at those different sides of humanity, but also showing that this is a book that is relatable but very distant and alien at the same time. So that's Gates of Fire, one of my favourite reads of 2022. And then after that, what did I read? I read another comic. I think this is the last comic I read in 2022, and that is Captain America White. And this is more looking at him in his original days before he was frozen, and looking at a lot of his relationship with Bucky and another kid who is following him as well. Well, the kid is Bucky, I think, actually. I don't know why I said both, but really enjoyable, and I really love this kind of origins style story. And as I said, I need to read more comics this year, and I hope to find much more like this one here. And then what do I have next? I have another Bernard Cornwell book, and that is The Empty Throne, if I can pick it up. And someone gave me advice how to remove this, and I've forgotten what it was. Hate the stickers on there, so I'll just hide it as I hold it. But The Empty Throne, another brilliant one, probably my favourite of the Saxon Story series so far. This is one that really allows Uhtred's children to come into play, and I love how that really changes the relationship of the book and makes it feel much more unique. And it's kind of an idea he takes forward in the next few books as well, which makes it feel very fresh and very enjoyable. And another great book in the Saxon Stories series. Next up, the second instalment in the Richard the Lionheart series. I talked about Lionheart earlier, but now the second instalment, and I love how this continues the epic story of kind of the Crusade, which Richard the Lionheart is known so well for, and the greater political machinations between the powers, particularly within Europe, between England and France, and then the papacy as well. But also you've got the more intimate story of Ferdia trying to survive, but also his tale for vengeance and survival. And I love how they interweave between each other, this more smaller plot and the grander one as well. And I thought Ben Kane does a brilliant job and continues with these great characters and continues the development. And yeah, some really brilliant action sequences in here as well. And then next up, I've got another historical fiction author. This is Giles Christian, but he did a thriller. He went away from his usual Viking sagas and went to where blood runs cold. And this is really great mystery thriller, which is contemporary, but is more about the relationship between a father and daughter. So we've got this family who have gone skiing and they have witnessed a murder. And so the father and daughter are trying to escape, and they're really experiencing the weather, which is both friend and foe, because it hides them from those pursuing them, but also it is dangerous. And anything could go wrong at any moment, and really trying to survive these harsh conditions. And it's a very tense read, and as I said, I love how it's got that mystery thriller element, but it's a lot about the relationship between father and daughter as well. And it feels weird comparing them, but it's a bit like In the Road by Cormac McCarthy. The father would do anything to protect his son, but at times not a lot is said, and there are barriers between them. And Where Blood Runs Cold is similar in that aspect, where the story revolves around that relationship and really powers everything that hits hard. And this was a really great read, and Giles Christian shows that he is a brilliant author who is very flexible and can write in basically any genre. And then next up, what do I have? The Name of the Rose. This was such a disappointment. This has been such a huge book. It's very popular. I think it was written in the 1980s, and it's another crime mystery, a bit like Dissolution by C.J. Sansom, and it's set in the medieval period, and it's a murder in an Italian monastery, I believe. It's near the Alps anyway. I think it's in Italy. And I just thought the beginning was great, but then it got very, very dry and a bit rambly. In my opinion, I'm glad so many people have enjoyed it, but to me, it was a bit of a disappointment, sadly. And then next up, I have the 9th installment of the Saxon Story. So many Bernard books in 2022. He was my most read author. And this is the 9th installment, and it continues the great run of this series, which the first 3 are really great, and then there's a dip, and then this is another run of 3 or 4 books, which is absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. Warriors of the Storm, whilst we've still got, as I said, the template of a new bad guy every single book who's going to be defeated, basically. But amongst that, you've got this more development of the relationship between Uhtred and his children, and also some other great characters who come into the mix. And I love how it's looking more on his past, as Uhtred knows he's getting older, he's beyond his prime now, he has to use his mind cunning more now. And yeah, I really love how that shows the evolution of character. And the advantage of having such a long series that spans quite a large period of time is something that most authors can't do, is explore character from when they're very young to becoming an old man. And I love how Bernard has created such a vivid and well-realised character as Uhtred. And this was the book where I thought Uhtred is one of the best characters of all time. Because before he is, of course, great, but this is one where he's more reflective and looking past his past regrets, and he's feeling the weight of his oaths upon him as he realises he's not going to live forever. He's feeling a bit old and a bit more fragile now, and as I said, has to use his cunning a bit more than his brawn and his skill as a warrior. And so yeah, that is Warriors of the Storm. And what do I have next? I have The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and of course this is very, very well known. Whilst it's a manual for war, I love how it's also a manual for life as well, as about patience. And whilst, of course, I'm not going to be giving military advice to anyone soon, it's really also, as I said, it really did surprise me how you can really apply this to your day-to-day life. It's about patience, working hard, making sure that you're prepared for the events that you know are coming, and it's about hoping for the best, prepare for the worst, and really engaging. And I really enjoyed reading this. It took me aback how much I enjoyed it. And so yeah, short read, I recommend The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And then next up, I have The Cross and the Curse, Book 2 in the Bernicia Chronicles by Matthew Harvey. I talked about this a bit earlier with The Serpent Sword. This continues it. I love how Bearbrand is coming a bit more into his leadership. He's given his first few responsibilities, and I love how that is explored in The Cross and the Curse. And then next I have a Terry Pratchett book, Mort, the first book I've read by him other than Good Omens, which he co-authored with Neil Gaiman. And this is the first book of the absurdist subgenre within fantasy, and that is Mort. And this is about a boy who becomes apprenticed to death. And I love how you've got the humour within there, and of course the absurdism, but then amongst that you've got more deeper themes that really come into play, looking at the relationship with death, the idea of belonging, and how does death feel about being the person who is the last to see everyone before they die. And I really like some of the ideas Terry Pratchett explores in here, and it was far more powerful than I was expecting. It's more than just a fun little book. It's more, as I said, than you expect, and I'm really looking forward to carrying on with Discworld in 2023. And then next up, I have another Uhtred book. I'm sorry I'm talking about them so much. The Flamebearer. This dipped a little bit again, but it's still a good read. 3.5, 4 stars in my opinion. And so I can't really say much more. It's another Sex and Stories book, and it was enjoyable. And then I read another classic, and that is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And I love how this is an exploration that initially seems a bit like a similar classic, but then we really look into some horror aspects and looking at why you should not adventure beyond your front door, basically. And it was very interesting, showing kind of the abuse of power, the allure of power, the seductiveness of that as well, and also that aura of we believe we're invincible as well and superior to others. And Joseph Conrad showed a very dark lens on that. And so yeah, really engaging, haunting read as well, filled with a lot of tension. And that is Heart of Darkness, and another classic that I got to in 2022 that I've really, really enjoyed. And then what do I have next? I have a book by R.J. Barker, and this is the second in his Tidechild trilogy, and this one was called Call the Bone Ship, and this was really enjoyable. I liked book 1, but this is where it got a lot better in my opinion. I thought the characters were really, really well realised, really unique, and yeah, it was a great book. A lot of people say they don't enjoy nautical reads, but I don't know any nautical reads other than Moby Dick, and I've not read that. And so, yeah, this is the best nautical book that I've ever read, and R.J. Barker did a great job that, whilst it is obviously contained mostly to just being on one ship, allowing it to feel varied and allowing the tone and setting and atmosphere to evolve as well, despite being contained in a very small area. And as I said, I thought the characters were a lot more unique in this book, and their motivations and desires more well realised and put across. And I love how you've got that element of mystery to a lot of their backgrounds. And then next up, I've got the sequel to Amaro, so that kind of short story collection. And this is The Quest for Kush, and I thought it had those same kind of nostalgic qualities, but a more engaging narrative. And so, yeah, I did really enjoy this. I thought there were some great moments, good action sequences, but as I said, more of a through line which tied these stories together and allowed me to feel more immersed and also engaged with the story and how it was unfolding. And then next up, I have another one of my favourite reads of 2022, and that is A Fool's Hope by Mike Shackle, the second instalment of The Last War. And I absolutely love this. I love how it took a lot of what I really enjoyed about We Are the Dead and allowed the story to progress to a more epic story, as it should in a fantasy series. But as I said, contained those qualities of the first one, didn't lose them, and I really love the balance that Mike Shackle struck in this. And the twists and the turns was brilliant, and I love some of the fresh ways he found to do something which has been seen in fantasy before, but the ways he managed to get us there was absolutely brilliant and unique, and really just taking fantasy in a fresh new direction. And so this is a great mix of different kind of themes. It feels grimdark in many ways, but you've got characters who you're rooting for and those who you love as well, and who are obviously good people, but then you've got others who are a lot more flawed and are probably most definitely terrible people. But as I said, this is a great read. I highly recommend The Last War, one of my favourite series of all time, and this is the second instalment. And then I was wrong, I had another comic, and that is Deceased, and this is DC, but it's kind of about basically everyone dying, and I thought it sounds really interesting, but it's the way it was done, it's about a disease basically gets let out, and I was a bit disappointed by how it unfolded, where I won't go into it actually, I don't have enough time, but yeah, I was a bit disappointed with this one. I had a really cool premise, but again, one that just wasn't quite pushed in the direction I really want it to be. So yeah, that is Deceased, another comic. My last comic, I'm not lying this time, the last comic I read in 2022. And what do I have next? I have the first of the Edgar Allan Poe short stories that I read, and that was The Telltale Heart, and this is haunting, this is brilliant, and it's about someone who hears a heartbeat below the floorboards and then take it from there. And this is only 7 or 8 pages long, and the film Prisoners with Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal was inspired by this story. So yeah, take from that what you will. I love the film, and I thought this was a great short story as well, brilliantly written. And then next up I have The Pariah by Anthony Ryan, and this is the book 1 of his The Covenant trilogy. Book 3 is being released in 2023, and it's got kind of Robin Hood twist, the medieval fantasy take on it as well, and I really enjoyed that kind of mix. And Anthony Ryan's a great writer with really efficient and accessible prose, and a really great cast of characters in The Pariah. So yeah, I highly recommend this. And then I've got another Edgar Allan Poe short story, and that is The Oval Portrait, and I absolutely love this. It's, as I said, it's about a portrait, but the twist, that's what Edgar Allan Poe's so great at. I discovered that you've kind of got this idea which is quite simple, and you're thinking, I have no idea where this is going to go, and then he just shows you something which is really impactful, and at times very haunting, at times filled with tension, at times the revelations are amazing. Usually they're not heartwarming. Probably never heartwarming, actually. But yeah, that is The Oval Portrait. My favourite, or maybe second favourite, short story by Edgar Allan Poe. And then next up I have The Mask of the Red Death, which may be my favourite. And this is probably the one he's most well known for. And this is basically about people, there's a disease and so in a city, and so the royalty locked themselves away, and they're having these massive balls and huge amounts of food, whilst everyone else outside of their walls are dying with the disease and have no food. And then, as Edgar Allan Poe wouldn't allow it to be otherwise, there's a big twist to that. And so yeah, I went on a bit of a binge of reading Edgar Allan Poe short stories, because next up I read A Tale for Jerusalem, which is one that didn't quite click with me so much. This is one I don't really remember as many of the details of. It's another very short story, but one that the revelation just didn't quite click with me. And then next up I have, of course, a great one, and I am not unbiased at all, I admit, and that is The Shadow of the Gods by John Papa Gwyn, book 1 of the Bloodsworn Saga. I reread them, I listened to them on Audible for the first time this year, and I absolutely loved it. Colin Mace does a brilliant job. Do go check it out if you haven't already. Of course, book 1 of the Bloodsworn Saga, Ragnarok, but in a fantasy world, and the aftermath. If all the gods have died, what happens? What happens to their children? What happens to the mortals left behind? And I love that premise, and Papa Gwyn, in my unbiased opinion, did a brilliant job. And then next up, I have The Girl on the Mountain by Mark Lawrence, book 2 of his Book of the Ice trilogy. And Yaz, I love how she really goes a step further in the development here. And I love how this story is taken it in a far different direction than what I initially expected and predicted. And so, yeah, I love that Mark Lawrence has brilliant prose, but also within this, an engaging story which goes in different directions from what you expect. And then next up, I have the third instalment of The Greatcoats by Sebastian de Castell. This continues what is a great series, in my opinion. And as I said, I was talking about that bromance earlier on, and it comes into play again. And Saints Blood, it takes the series in a different direction once again. And I love how this is a series that is not afraid to go in different directions and break the barriers. A bit like what I said with The Girl on the Mountain by Mark Lawrence. And so, yep, another one that I really highly recommend. Next up, I have Ring Shout. This is a novella that has won many an award, and it is set in 1922, and it's about a group that stand against the Ku Klux Klan, but with a fantasy, horror, supernatural twist. And so, yeah, I was really expecting something fantastic, and whilst the writing was brilliant, I thought the idea wasn't carried out as well. A bit like what I said with Tender is the Flesh. And so yeah, overall a bit disappointing, but still one that I highly recommend and one that I think a lot of other people would really, really love. And then next up I've got The Uncertainty, the second book of Vindolander by Adrian Goldsworthy. And this is historical fiction set in Britain, but during the period where the Roman Empire had a grip on the Isles. And so I thought this was really great, and I need to finish the series. Another one that I've got one installment left. I've got so many ongoing series. I need to wrap some of them up. And I enjoyed book 1, which is called Vindolander, but I enjoyed book 2 even more. And the culmination was brilliant. I really enjoyed how all these aspects that are planted in book 1 and 2 are really coming together. And you see a lot of that come to fruition at the end of book 2, but there's a lot more that you can see coming in book 3. So as I said, I really need to finish the series. And then next up I have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a book that needs no introduction. I really enjoyed this, really enjoyed this, and I think Stephen Fry narrated it when I listened to it, and I think he's the narrator, and it was really enjoyable. And I loved kind of going back to this classic that I've never read before, but so many people have absolutely loved. And as I said, it was great, really entertaining, and it's just very humorous and amusing. And so yeah, I really enjoyed reading that. And next I have Beyond Redemption, another very humorous book, but in completely different ways. This is labelled as Grimdark. It's about basically, imagine the bromance in the greatcoats of those main 3 characters, and then imagine that they despise each other. And there you go, you've got Beyond Redemption. I forgot the name for a second there. You've got Beyond Redemption. And yeah, really great read, really interesting. I need to carry on with the series. Oh, that's going to be my favourite phrase this video, isn't it? I need to finish the series. But next up I have The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. His debut book 1 release in 2022. I'm looking forward to reading book 2, which is published in February 2023. And I've been lucky enough to be granted early access by through NetGalley, sorry. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully reading that before release and getting a video up on the channel. But there we go, The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. Really great, really enjoy kind of the lore lens brought to fantasy in the form of Sir Conrad von Valt, the Emperor's Justice. And so yeah, I really like how kind of that lore theme makes an entrance in the fantasy genre and takes it in a fresh new direction, which I always love in any genre, particularly fantasy. And what do I have next? That is the question. I have some more Papa Gwyn, and that is The Hunger of the Gods. As I said earlier, I've read The Blood Sworn for the first time in audio format, and I really enjoyed Shadow of the Gods. And of course, I loved The Hunger of the Gods. It came out in 2022, so I listened to it upon release, and it was just so awesome. This is probably my second favourite book by Papa Gwyn, and so yeah, they are big, bold words and a lot of praise there. Then I have another Mark Lawrence book, and that is Dispel Illusion, the third book of his Impossible Times trilogy. And it's great. It's kind of inspired by kind of like Stranger Things vibe of a few kids loving D&D in the 1980s. And this is the third of the trilogy, and brilliantly done. And I love the combination of looking kind of these scientific aspects, which go way over my head, but I still found really engaging. And also the cast of characters, really great. And as always with Mark Lawrence, he's provided an entertaining, unique and engaging read. And then next up I have Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. This is a tale of identity, purpose, the cruelty of life, and also the influence of faith. And I thought that this was very distinctive, but for me, just missed the mark. So sadly, this classic of the 20th century just did not click with me. And then I have one of my favourites, a book that did click with me, and this is The Empire of the Vampire by J. Christoph, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel, hopefully in 2023. And basically a natural phenomenon called day's death has occurred, which means the sun does not shine quite as brightly. And so of course this has caused environmental crises, as many plants refuse to grow now, a lot of crops are dying, but also probably as bad, if not worse, that vampires can now walk about in the day, which is something none of us need, do we? And I absolutely love how this has a unique take on the sword, kind of the training school, and makes it such an engaging read. And also it's a framing narrative with a chronicler's tale, and I love how all these different kind of tropes come to play, and then J. Christoph subverts them and adds an incredible cast into the mix as he does so in what is, in my opinion, an incredible book. And then what do we have up next? We have the Maleficent 7 by Cameron Johnston, and this is fantasy, and it is kind of a take on the Magnificent Seven film, that kind of trope now. And so it's about a group of fantasy creatures like necromancers and orc chieftain and so on and so forth, and they were fighting together once, but they all broke apart, some betrayed each other. I won't go too far into it because that's part of the fun of the book, and they've been reunited for some reason, and they have to fight a force, and they don't all like each other, so it's not quite as happy as many books that have taken inspiration by Magnificent Seven. But yeah, really great book, really humorous, but with some greater levels of depth and more layers than I was expecting. And then I have Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I love so many Shakespeare plays, and Hamlet is one that has gotten so much respect from so many critics, and now me. I thought it was brilliant. I love how it's showing this descent into madness, and whilst it's not my favourite Shakespeare play, I still probably prefer Macbeth, and Richard III is one that, as I said, I have so much respect for, and I definitely need to read again. And then after that, I have The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. This is set in 74 AD in the city of Troy, and we have a woman called Amara who is forced to work in a brothel when she is a slave. And I love how, whilst this is one POV, we see so much of her character, but also an exploration of all the women around her and so many other characters. And it's an incredible book, another one of my favourites of 2022, and I need to read more by Elodie Harper. I'm looking forward to carrying on with this trilogy with The House with the Golden Door, and then book 3 is released in 2023, so I'll be able to wrap this up. But The Wolf Den, absolutely brilliant, and I recommend it to literally everyone, and it's another one that I've got a review on the channel for. And then next up, going back to some fantasy, this is a fantasy novella. This is by Ryan Cahill. This is The Fall, and this is great. So well done. A history to the bound and the broken in a little short story here, novella. And I thought it was done brilliantly, where it's basically one big conflict, but it says so much, answers a lot of questions, but also presents a lot more that I had about this world. And so I highly recommend this. Ryan Cahill shows himself to not just be of Blood and Fire is not a fluke. It is a great book, but it's a great book because Ryan Cahill is a great writer. And then next up, I have book 3 of the Tide Child trilogy, and that is The Bone Ship's Wake. And I thought this was a great culmination to the series. There's a little bit that maybe I was so surprised by where kind of the direction it took that it took me a little while to actually adapt. But the ending, the final third, was absolutely brilliant. And this is where I saw R.J. Barker as a great action writer as well. And as I said, great ending, went against all my expectations, but really brilliant. And I loved how it was very satisfying, and it was very apt for the characters, but I couldn't guess it either. So yeah, it was great in those respects. And then I've got King by Ben Kane, the third and final book in the Richard the Lionheart trilogy, and this is quite an emotional end, and I love how he's explored the flaws and virtues of our central characters, so many who have become very famous and are almost wrapped up in myth over the centuries. Of course, Richard the Lionheart is one of the most famous of the English kings, and so yeah, I really loved how Ben Kane showed us a lens on his life, and in the whole series, and also in the finale, King. And then next up, I have the beginning of my Westeros binge, and that was A Game of Thrones, of course. I'd never read any of these before, but I loved reading A Game of Thrones, and I had some spoilers. I knew some spoilers, sadly, but it was still absolutely brilliant. And wow, what a book. It's become huge for a reason, and I don't mean in terms of page count, although that is pretty big as well. Don't let this, it seems big but not huge, but the font size is small. So yeah, you got that as well. It's a big book, as you expect when it's got George R. R. Martin's name on it. Alright, I'm being very long, so I'm going to have to be a bit quicker. And Max Hastings by... it's not Max Hastings by Operation Pedestal, the other way around. This is non-fiction on World War II, and it's about the naval conflict, which is called Operation Pedestal, which revolved around getting resources to Malta. And it's not quite what I was looking for, but there's some really interesting sequences in this, and I need to read more by Max Hastings. And then next up I have, I believe, Shaggy Bane. Yes, Shaggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. This won the Booker Prize in 2020, and is a relationship between a mother and son set in Glasgow. So you have got that Glaswegian vernacular coming into play, which may be a little barrier at the beginning, but I believe you'll quickly adapt to it, as I did, and it's a really powerful story. It made me cry. It's got moments of joy and moments of utter depression, or they thrust you into a depression anyway, but it was brilliant. And then I've got, knocking books everywhere now, I've got To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and this is a book that works on so many different levels. It's about love, family, memory, and progress. And how life evolves and changes and can never go back to what it was. And so it feels quite poignant and nostalgic in a weird way, but I thought it was really well written. And Virginia Woolf, I think I preferred Orlando, which I read by her in 2021, but to the Lighthouse is another great book by her that I've managed to get around to. And then what is next? And that is my beginning of the reread of The Lord of the Rings, as they were narrated by Andy Serkis. And Fellowship of the Ring, absolutely awesome. And I like Tom Bombadil. I don't care what you say. He's an entertaining character and very interesting as well. And then who's next? I have different seasons, but I didn't read them all. I read Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. Brilliant, absolutely fantastic. The film was pretty, what's the word? True, so authentic to the story, and so there's not too much to add, but I thought it was brilliantly written. And then I also read Apt Pupil, which is horrifying, about a boy who finds about the dark past of his neighbour, and instead of telling the authorities, he uses this knowledge as leverage over his neighbour, so long as the old man tells him everything. So very dark and traumatizing to read, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then what is next? I have Blood and Blade, book 3 of the Bernicia Chronicles by Matthew Harvey, and this continues Bear Brand's story in an absolutely brilliant and engaging way. And there's a quest for vengeance in this as well, which I thought was a very, very well done. And then next up, I've got the next in the Lord of the Rings, of course, The Two Towers. Absolutely love this. I love how you're meeting the Rohirrim, and obviously Shelob is in this as well, not in the final one as in the film. And some people don't like how the story is kind of split in half, where you're following Aragorn and that group and Rohan, and then you're going to Frodo and Sam. But I think it works well. I understand how in a modern format we do like to jump to and fro a bit more. But still, the way Tolkien writes, I just absolutely love it. There's nothing that he's written that I've not really, really enjoyed. And then, wow, I've actually gone 5 minutes without talking about Bernard Cornwell book, but I'm here to rectify that. War of the Wolf, which I believe is, let me read here, the 11th instalment of the Saxon Stories. So not the penultimate one, the one before the penultimate one. And this was great. I love some of the adventures here. And there's something that we've been aiming for 11 books that hangs on the balance in this. And I love how that comes into play, and it's done absolutely brilliantly. And then next up, I have Daughter of Red Winter by Ed MacDonald. And this is an interesting take on the training school. But instead of being in the training school, our character is made as a house servant, basically. And I love how it's kind of different take on that. Where she's privy, she can hear a lot of information as people are talking around her, not really they're underestimating her. And I love how that comes to play, adds a different lens to the training school and a different perspective. And then what do I have next? The Templars by Dan Jones. And this was really interesting, looking at the rise and fall of the Templars, their order, and a lot of the propaganda that took place, and looking at many of the major political events of the medieval period in Europe. And then I have the Official Highway Code, which helped me pass my theory test, and I thought that well written, well structured, but it was lacking a bit in plot. And then next up I have The Return of the King by Tolkien, the third and final instalment of The Lord of the Rings. And I love how there's basically 6 different endings here. There is a joke where it's like, oh, the ending's here. Oh wait, no, we've got another story. Oh, we've got another story. We've got another. But I love it, because I never want this to end. But when it does, it is bittersweet. Amazing story, brilliant end. I love how this is, but I just basically know everything about it now, because I've read it so many times and watched them so many times, and I just love Middle-earth, a living, breathing space. No one has made a world as brilliant as Arda, in my opinion. And what do I have next? I have Until the Last by Mike Shack, with the final instalment of the Last War series, and a brilliant conclusion. A big portion of this is a big battle, but it's done in a way that keeps you engaged the whole way, and it's just absolutely exceptional, and a series that I highly recommend to everyone. And then I have Priest of Crowns, another ending to a great series, and this is by Peter McLean. Imagine Peaky Blinders set in the medieval period, but in a fantasy world with some fantasy elements. If you're not sold, I don't know what will get you sold, but a brilliant ending to the series. Thomas Party's a brilliant character, and I love how this series ends. And next up, I have another great book, and that is The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. This is historical fantasy set in Ireland. It's at the tail end of the 10th century, and we're seeing the Vikings land and kind of establishing a more dominant position on the Irish shores, but then also the changing of religions, and I really love how everything comes into play, but mixing that with Irish mythology. Great balance between those historical and fantastical mythological details. And then next up, what do I have? I have Sword of Kings by Bernard Cornwell, the final Bernard Cornwell book I'll be talking about. And this is the 12th instalment of the Saxon Stories, only one to go. And part of this dropped. I really enjoyed the first third. Didn't enjoy the middle so much, and then the final part was brilliant. I'm so looking forward to seeing how this series ends. It'll be bittersweet after being with Richard for so many books. But then I have Essex Dogs by Dan Jones, more historical fiction, really brilliant. I've got a review on the Brothers Gwyn if you want to hear my full thoughts, but I love how this looks at the wider scope of warfare, not just what we see all the time. And then some more Tolkien. I have the Silmarillion, the history of Middle-earth, basically, and I absolutely love this. It's got many of my favourite characters of all time. Beren and Luthien is probably the greatest short story, you could call it, I've ever read, but there's so much more that I love about the Silmarillion. And then what do I have next? I have Fall of Kings by David Gemmell, the finale to his Trojan... Wait, is this the finale? Yeah, it's the finale. The finale to his Troy series, his Troy trilogy. And book 2 is a bit of a dip for me, but book 3 really rises back and it's absolutely brilliant. Love how this is a fresh take on the Trojan myth, and really does a great job of showing it in a new, engaging way. And yeah, as I said, really enjoyed it. Now, some more historical fiction. The Wolfsea by Robert Lowe. After I enjoyed book 1, The Well Road of the Oathsworn, but didn't love it, and then Papa Gwyn and my brother Ed said, no, carry on. You'll really see why this series is brilliant. And I agree, The Wolfsea was great. Taking this band of warriors who they keep that kind of mindset of that feels authentic to the Norse way, but also adds a lot more heart in this as well. And I love how that balance was struck. And then I've Gideon the Ninth, which is sci-fi, fantasy, amalgamation of genres, basically. Very humorous. Love this story of kind of a challenge, a trial, as people have to go to this area, but done very, very well with, as I said, a lot of humour into the mix. And then I have some non-fiction, The Fall of Carthage, and this is basically about the wars, the 3 Punic Wars between the Roman Empire and Carthage, and this is how Rome basically established itself to be so powerful because it wiped out its main rival. And yeah, Carthage was a very dominant power for a long period of time, and so this was very interesting, seeing it at its peak and then dropping. And then obviously we've got the kind of the figure of Hannibal in the mix there as well, which I knew next to nothing about, other than how he got through the Alps and went around into the northern Italy. And that was really interesting. And then some more historical fiction. I have A Time for Swords by Matthew Harvey. This is about the origins of the Norse threat on the English shores, focusing on the raid at Lindisfarne. And no, that was not the first raid of the Norse, but we'll just say it is for the sake of it, because that's what it's known for now. But this is kind of another book that takes a take on Magnificent Seven, and I love how it's kind of getting this group together and then defending a certain area. But done in a much more complex way. I've oversimplified it far too much. It's far more engaging than that. And Matthew Harvey, as I've said many times in this video already, is a great writer. And more non-fiction, The Complete Roman Army by Adrian Goldsworthy. I talked about his fiction earlier, his historical fiction, The Encircling Sea. And then I read this, and that was after The Fall of Carthage, which was also by Adrian Goldsworthy. And this is basically just about the 3 different periods that often the Roman Empire split into, and about how the Roman army evolved over that time. Very interesting, got a lot of notes there, a bit of research I was doing. And so yeah, really, really great if this is the sort of research and thing you're looking to learn more about. And then next up, what do I have? I have Legends and Lattes, a phenomenon of 2022. And I've done a review on the channel, which I think is up now. But if it's not, it will be very, very soon. Got a lovely art card here. This is the Broken Binding Special Edition. And this is about a orc who's a warrior, a veteran who retires and sets up a coffee shop. What more needs to be said? And what do I have next? I have A Clash of Kings carrying on with A Song of Ice and Fire. And I really, really loved Game of Thrones. I absolutely adored A Clash of Kings. This is my favourite book. Favourite read of 2022. Well, it changes with one other book that I'll talk about a bit later on. But yeah, this is always in my top 2 books of 2022. Tyrion in this becomes one of the greatest characters of all time, in my opinion. And then I have got All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. And this is a heartwarming group of stories, which is basically a love letter to Darrowby, a village in the Yorkshire Dales, as James Herriot recounts his early days as a vet in the 1930s. And I'm an animal lover, so I love hearing all these stories about animals, but also the people and the mindset. And James Herriot just writes so many funny stories as well as he recounts his experiences as a vet. And then I read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and this was a bit of a shame to me. I found it a bit jarring that it's feeling very adult and very evolved and looking at trying to strip away the romanticism, warfare, and show it realistically. And then you've got a character who just, like, she in 2 months learns martial arts enough to beat people who have trained for 10 years. It just didn't click well with me. But then I read Babel, but also by A.F. Kwang, historical fantasy, and it's one of the best books I've ever read. And this is set in the Victorian period. A boy of Chinese descent is in Canton and his family die of a disease, and a mysterious professor turns up and agrees to adopt him as long as he promises to study Latin and the classics, but also retain his mastery of the Chinese language as well. And he does that, and then he's put in the Oxford branch, the translation branch at Oxford University, and the story goes from there. Really brilliant, engaging read that looks a lot at things thematically, but also the characters are very, very engaging as well. And then I read Carrie by Stephen King, and you don't usually think this was Stephen King, but I thought that this was a bit overcomplicated, but some great elements in the mix as well. The culmination is absolutely incredible. One of the best endings I've ever had the pleasure of reading. And then I listened to Fire and Blood, a portion of this which inspired House of the Dragon, and of course this is a history to Westeros, and really enjoyable. The bits did become a bit repetitive at times. Basically, a Targaryen married their sibling, the people of Westeros got angry because it went against their beliefs, and then there was a rebellion, and then the Targaryens won, and then a generation later they committed incest and it happened again. But I'm oversimplifying it again, but it was very enjoyable, but bits tended to be a tad repetitive. And then I've got Of Darkness and Light by Ryan Cale, the second instalment of The Bound and the Broken, and also a book that I've really, really enjoyed, continuing this series in a great way. And I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes from there. And then what is next? I have the second instalment in James Herriot's autobiographies, and this is All Creatures Wise and Wonderful, continuing from All Creatures Great and Small. I've loved the programme, and I actually enjoyed book 2 even more than book 1. I loved how James Herriot continues with his very, very funny and moving stories about the animals, but also it's about the preparation where a lot of people were heading off to World War II. So it's got that more serious themes coming into play as well, but it feels so human and raw and very just honest as well. And I loved how that came into play in this kind of recounting of his own life. And then I've got Along the Razor's Edge by Rob J. Hayes. This is self-published and really great. It's about basically a girl who's 14 or 15 who was a sorceress, and she fought for the losing side in a war, and she was stripped of her magic and thrown into a pit with murderers, thieves, and all sorts of criminals. And I thought this would be a book where quickly she breaks out, joins the resistance, bada bing, bada boom, and goes from there. But there's far more to it than that. And it basically did nothing of what I was expecting. And so a great cast of characters as well. And then I read 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. This is another Greek retelling. And I thought the beginning, great idea, but I thought the tone wasn't fluctuating at all, so it felt a bit stagnant. But then after that initial quarter, it got absolutely brilliant. We're looking at all the female characters who are basically in the Trojan retelling, and just done absolutely brilliantly, where the timelines are fragmented and we jump from character to character to character, but then often return to a few who are more central to the story and more reoccurring as we go throughout, such as Penelope, Odysseus's wife, and some others as well. And it was very hard-hitting and some very emotional scenes that Natalie Haynes did brilliantly. And then I've got the final book, I'm sorry, the penultimate book, A Storm of Swords by George R. R. Martin, the third installment of A Song of Ice and Fire. And I was a bit surprised initially in the first 200-300 pages where there was basically no interactions between the POVs, which is one of his strong points. But then, wow, the second half, which is 600 pages, so the size of a normal book, well, bigger than a normal book. And the breakneck pace and the revelation after revelation, surprise after surprise, backstab after backstab, betrayal after betrayal. It was just staggering how it just went on and really just took my breath away. And it was brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. One of my favourite books of 2022. And then my final book of 2022. And this is the one that, alongside A Clash of Kings, jumps between being my favourite and second favourite. And that is Dreaming the Eagle. I finished this on New Year's Eve. So what a way to finish the year. And it is historical fiction about Boudica, and this is book 1, Dreaming the Eagle, and this is a Bildungsroman as well about Breaka and her brother Ban, and they are the two perspectives, and it's absolutely incredible. My brother has been raving about this series on the Brothers of Gwyn all throughout 2022, and I'm joining the bandwagon, and we'll be doing that probably throughout the entirety of 2023. Oh my gosh. there we go. Thank you so much for watching. I've got through all these books. I feel exhausted having gone through all of them. And my throat, not my throat was gone. My voice is gone. It would be worrying if my throat was gone. But everyone, as I said, thank you so much for watching. Sorry, I've hit this mic a few times this video. I'm still getting used to wearing this instead of having one over there. Sorry, not having one over there, just speaking to my phone. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully there's a few that caught your attention of these books. Let me know any that you've enjoyed, any that are on your TBR, and I'm so tired, but thank you so much for watching, and stay safe.